Hello. For those of you who have joined, we're going to wait just a few moments here to let some others connect in. But welcome. Nice to have you with us. For those of you who are on the line, is everyone also connected in through the web link? And do you see a big welcome screen in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sir?
Yes.
No, I am not connected to the web link. I am having a car repair, so I'm just on the Audible on my phone.
Okay, no problem. If we'll try to kind of describe what we see as we go. We are going to try to record this so that if you want to see it later with the visual, hopefully you'll be able to. And we also will send the slides afterward so that you have the PDF of those as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to give it about 1 more minute, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for your patience. We have a few more people connecting in. All right. Well, welcome everyone. For those of you on the line, I think we have a few more who are going to be joining, but we'll just let them get here when they get here. So out of respect for your time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Buckle Up for Life Goal Setting Workshop. This is something that was optional. We wanted to present this material based on some requests that we had to do so. And certainly, if you have more questions or really any discussion after today, we'd love to kind of keep that conversation going. This is something here on our team in Cincinnati that we are constantly thinking about and trying to be better at as well. And we are excited to learn from what all of you are doing at your sites and very well have learnings that we can bring back to Cincinnati and do things here better. So My name, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Patrick Edmonds. I'm with the Buckle Up for Life team here in Cincinnati at headquarters. Over my shoulder, helping me out today, I have two Vanna Whites. We have Gloria and Cora. If you hear giggling in the background, it's probably them. So they're with me as well today, helping with some, especially keep me on track with the technology. So we're going to get started, and a couple housekeeping things first. If you could just keep your lines muted, unless, if you want to ask a question or throw in a comment, please feel free to do so. Just unmute your line to do that, but otherwise, if you keep that muted, I think we'll have better connection. Two other quick disclaimers I just want to say. First, I don't pretend and don't want to imply that I am an expert in this field. A lot of what we're going to cover today is kind of just high-level, basic, ideas and principles about goals. But if and when we get into the weeds a little bit with validity and reliability and those sorts of things, I'm not a statistician. I don't pretend to be. And in some cases, all of you may be able to better, provide information or resources. So just throw that out there. We're going to kind of skim a little bit more high level today. Is the first disclaimer. And the second one is we're going to, my goal for this next hour is to really toggle back and forth between kind of general ideas and principles about goal setting in general, and then toggle over to how we bring it into Buckle Up for Life specifically. So you'll see some of the examples we walk through have nothing to do with Buckle Up for Life, but I think there's value in just bringing in real-world, relatable examples from other parts of our life. So we're going to talk about goal setting in general, but then also how does it relate to this particular program. So to get started, I think when I kind of first started with quality improvement work, I didn't really understand the difference between a lot of these words. I feel like we have a tendency to use them interchangeably. We talk about outputs and outcomes and how are they different? Are they the same thing? Or what's your goal for this program? Or what's your aim this fiscal year? Or what's the strategy that you're going to take to get there? So these are all words that we tend to use interchangeably, but each of them really is pretty nuanced and kind of has its own meaning, at least for the way that we think about the programs that we run here from Cincinnati Children's. So if this is kind of a jumble and kind of a mess and a little confusing, that's what we are hoping to unpack today. So to get started, we're essentially going to go through some of those words you just saw. But to start off, we have mission, vision, and values. And I know these are, every organization, especially nonprofit organizations, we talk heavily about mission, vision, and values. And even those things, sometimes we get kind of confused or talk about interchangeably. So we're going to roll through really quick. But when we talk about mission, we talk about this is the reason we exist. This is why we have formed a program, why we formed an organization, an agency, an institution. This is our bread and butter of why we are here. Our vision is going to be, what does a future picture of success look like? So in other words, if we're successfully meeting our mission day to day in our operations, then the picture that we paint for the future is going to be rosy and is going to be an image of success. So that's what our vision is. Our values are going to be our beliefs and behaviors that guide us along the way. So they're the way that we frame our work so that we can fulfill our mission to the end of reaching our vision. And then our operating plan is more in the weeds, the day-to-day, how are we going to actually get this done. So when we talk about these items, the good news is for Buckle Up for Life, so now we're going to toggle back to Buckle Up for Life, the mission, vision, and values are really already kind of set. All of you are a part of that, you're bought into that, but this isn't something where we have to go back and reinvent the wheel. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So today what we really want to focus more on is this operating plan and how are we getting the work done that will fulfill our mission and our vision. So our next slide is going to be that. So we're going to unpack that operating plan and talk specifically about inputs, outputs, and outcomes. The impact comes into play a little bit later, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So if we talk about inputs, very simply, we're talking about what are the investments to the program. What are we putting into the system to change or alter something coming out of the system for the better. The outputs are what we do. So it's easy to measure outputs. This is probably the easiest. The inputs and outputs are the easiest things to measure. What are you putting in and what are you getting out? The outcomes is where we pivot a little bit, and we go from measuring strictly what we did to kind of more now, why does it matter? And specifically what we're talking about is behavior change, or change in the environment, or change in general. So just because we do something doesn't mean that something is changing or improving. We all know, I think we all know or have been around people who seem really busy all the time. They're busy, 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 but they're not really doing anything. So that's kind of the difference here between outputs and outcomes. And then impact is something that happens over time, and it's an overall benefit to society that is a result of kind of it's an aggregate result of all of the outcomes that you've influenced over time. So we invest into the program through inputs, we do things with the investments, and that's our outputs. The resulting changes that come about because of what we do are what we talk about with outcomes. And then impact is basically how is the world or the environment better because of all of those things that we did. So if we go through those same 8 boxes and we put a Buckle Up for Life lens on it, again, these top 3 are already defined for you. So just to kind of re-up on our mission here, for Buckle Up for Life, our mission is to provide child passenger safety education and life-saving resources to families everywhere. So all of you are bought into that. Obviously, if you're not bought into that, then we wouldn't have partnered with you to run this program. So that's foundational to what Buckle Up for Life is. The vision, again, what does a picture of success look like for the future? What that picture would be is for Buckle Up for Life to be the leader in eliminating motor vehicle-related injuries and deaths among children. So again, this is already out there. It's something we've all dedicated to already. For values, these are our beliefs and our behaviors. These are the 4 core values of Cincinnati Children's as we kind of administer this program. These are probably very aligned, I'm guessing, with the values of your organization. Most organizations have a set of core values that they subscribe to. So in your team, in your institution, you may have some that are a little bit different or additional ones than what's here in the blue box. But hopefully we can all agree that these are very important for the success of any program, telling the truth, honesty, respect, working as a team, and making a difference. And then the operating plan is where we're going to talk about those next boxes of inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And this is really where we get into goal orientation, so committing to having goals and creating goals and managing through those goals through strategic planning. This is going to be how we get it done. So mission, vision, values are ongoing. Operating plan is this grant cycle, which is what you can actually control. So when we get into the inputs, outputs, and outcomes, the Buckle Up for Life description here for inputs is going to be time, money, effort, program materials, partnership. This would include if we thought about how do we measure this, it would be your specific grant amount. We have sites across the nation who are funded at different levels. So for each site, the inputs might be a little bit different, but it's relevant to your program. It also would be in-kind staff hours or value of the time of the people working in your team, including volunteers, partners, and other people in the community. So outputs, what do you do? If we look at this through Buckle Up for Life lens, it's going to be all of your program activities. So this would include interventions, car seat distributions, education, assistance provided, etc. And as far as measuring it, the measure for all of you is going to be prescribed as well. And although that may be different from site to site because you have different expectations depending on your funding level, those expectations are out there. They're in the grant application as well as in your grant contract. So depending on the amount of funding that you have, your goals for your outputs for education numbers and seat distribution numbers will vary, but it's out there, and we share that with you, and those are points of conversation for our status calls and mid-year report and final year report and all that good stuff. For outcomes, this is where we're talking about increased participant knowledge, we're talking about changed behaviors, people buckling up more, people buckling up correctly, decreasing misuse of car seats and seat belts. This is where we really want people to start being safer. So we could, if we go to the outputs box, we could give out a whole bunch of car seats and no one could be safer if they're not changing their behavior or using them correctly or using them every time that they get in a car. So this outcomes box is really where we want to focus most of our conversation today. And specifically, how are we creating goals, SMART goals, that encourage meaningful outcomes? And the most important thing I think about this box is that these are really customized and tailored by you. So at each of your sites, you all know your community, you all know the families that you serve, you know the needs in your community. You really have a pulse on that assessment, and this is where we love for the local sites to kind of tell us, you know, what are the things that we can do and measure and plan that will really encourage behavior change and improved outcomes for our family. And then before we move to impact, if I could just remind everyone, if your phone's not on mute, if you could just mute your line, I think that would help with a little bit of the feedback that we're getting on the line. So that's the orientation for the Buckle Up for Life description. And then over time, when we talk about impact, what we're talking about is eliminating motor vehicle deaths, injuries, and the measure there. And this is, again, I put a line here and put over time because we don't expect in 1 year for you to be able to demonstrate decreased, injury or mortality rates on your trauma registry or, through population data, that sort of thing. That's something that's going to take more time than a 12-month grant cycle. But we know that and we kind of recognize that. But over time, this is what we think the aggregate effect will be across the country, and that's decreasing injury rates, death rates for kids and families due to motor vehicle crashes. So that was a lot of charts and really technical. Let's switch modes a little bit and look at an example that has nothing to do with Buckle Up for Life. So let's pretend for a moment we're going to go back to like kindergarten and pretend, put it on our imagination cap. So let's pretend like we're one big giant family, and we're the Buckle Up for Life family, right, nationwide. So we're a family, and we're going to go on a cross-country family road trip. So if we want to do that, anybody remember this movie? It's a great movie, back from the 80s. This is, a nice, smiling family. Everybody's happy. They have their bags packed. Everything's going great, right? So this is like when we enter the phase of planning a program or setting goals, and we say we have really high hopes and everything is looking up, and we have nothing but confidence that we're going to meet our goals and be successful, right? Look how happy they are. But then we know from the movie, for those who've seen it, quickly things start to fall apart. Our plan doesn't work out quite as we had hoped, and then we have chaos. So what we want to try to do is avoid the chaos and avoid the disaster and really connect our lofty ideals for goal setting to an actionable plan to help us meet those goals. So if we think about this family trip, we're going to go cross-country. We could still look at each of these 8 buckets. So if we start with our mission, this is our reason for existence. So why do we want to go on this road trip? So we want to do this because we want to drive, our mission would be to drive across country, Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean, with our whole family for an unforgettable summer experience, right? That's the reason that we're existing. If we want to go into the vision, this would be a picture of future success. So what does that look like? That would be to take a picture of the whole family in front of the Pacific Ocean, and that means that we made it, right? So our mission is to drive across country. Our vision is to get there and to get it done. Okay. Our values are going to be to drive safely and always obey the rules of the road. So we want to, if we're driving across country, we want to do it safely. We'd also like the kids in the back seat to be getting along and be respectful of each other. So that's going to be kind of the rules that dictate how we get across the country. Our inputs are going to be, again, these are always easy to measure, but we're talking about gas, hotels, food, souvenirs, everything that we pay for. Our outputs could be easily measured as well as far as miles driven. Our outcomes would be, hey, we saw a lot of new sites, new cities, interesting things. We saw the Grand Canyon, and we shared those experiences together. And then the overall impact or benefit would be that now we're a strengthened family, and we just spent an amazing summer together. Now we're closer as a tight-knit family. So really anything that you want to plan or do, or any goal that you have, you could look at all of these buckets and sort it out to make sense. Okay, so for today, we are really going to look at this bucket of the operating plan, and specifically inputs, outputs, and outcomes, because this is really, no pun intended, but this is where the rubber meets the road as far as actually getting work done, and that's given that we all have finite period grant programming. This is where we're going to focus today. So we're going to go really quickly through inputs and outputs, and I'll throw in a caveat here that this chart is the chart for our new one-year partner sites. So if we have any of our 3-year partner sites on the line, these numbers are different than your numbers, so we do acknowledge that this is just a screenshot from what the new sites are doing. So the funding levels are different and the total expectations are different. But for inputs, that's really easy. It's already prescribed for you. So we have when you applied for your grant and when we wrote the contract, there was a certain dollar amount, a level of funding that was committed to the program. So that's a done deal. The outputs, again, that expectation is already there. We don't have to do any planning around what those numbers are going to be because, again, that was part of your application and it was part of your contract. What we do want to plan around, though, are outcomes. And this is the part, like I said, that is exciting because rather than us, as in years past, for those of you who have been around Buckle Up for Life for a while, in years past we said we want you to do car seat observations because that's going to measure change to behavior and we're going to know if people are buckling up correctly, and we're going to do pre-tests at the beginning of the program where we might stand in the parking lot and count the number of cars with kids buckled up properly, and then we're going to do a post-test at the end of the program and we're going to do the same count and we're going to measure the difference, and that's going to give us a read on whether behavior changed or not. And that's still a valuable...
But I want to listen here or I want to listen right here. I started to touch some button and nothing. No.
Oh, Mauricio, if you could mute your phone, that would be great. The observations are still a great way to measure behavior change, but in years past we prescribed how many you had to do and what the goals would look like and what we wanted the reduction of misuse to be. And we're getting away from that now because we realize there's very real limitations in each community and each program. So we want you to set goals that matter to your community and matter to your program. So an example of what an outcome could still be observation tests where we literally count cars coming through or count kids in car seats and compare a pre-test with a post-test. We could also think about things like surveys or measuring knowledge or measuring attitude or how people feel about buckling up or things like that. But that's really something that you and your programs get to decide. So when we talk about outcomes, we really want to get smart with our goals. And this is something that here I know at Cincinnati Children's we've been pushing for a while now, but are really trying to hone in on how we write our goals and how we think about our goals. So for those of you who haven't seen this before, when we talk about SMART, we want to make sure that every goal that we write or that we commit to is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable and actionable, it's relevant and realistic, and it's time-bound. So we can just quickly roll through those buckets. Specific is really easy. We want to know how much are we doing, what are we doing, where are we doing it, who is doing it. Is it going to be led by volunteers? Is it going to be led by staff? Is it going to be at a school? Is it going to be at a church? If it's a church, how many churches? Is it in the spring or is it in the fall? And how much do we want to move the needle? How many car seats do we want to give out? How many teens versus parents versus children do we want to talk to or educate? So this is what we mean when we be specific. When we're talking about measurable, the first thing that we want to note is that baseline is critical. So for every goal that you write, make sure you have a baseline, and I'll add that it's totally okay for the baseline to be 0. But when we talk about writing goals, we would never, so to toggle away from Buckle Up for Life for a minute, we'd never just write a goal that says, I want to drink 8 glasses of water a day, right? If we don't know how many glasses of water we're currently drinking. Because if we're already drinking 7 glasses of water and our goal is to drink 8 glasses of water, that's not really that difficult of a goal to reach. But if we're currently drinking 0 glasses of water and we want to now drink 8 glasses of water, that's a huge difference, and it's a much bigger goal. So although you could write a goal without a baseline, when you include the baseline, it gives you for how realistic, relevant, and time-bound and measurable the goal is going to be, and it gives you a gravity for your efforts to know, is this something I can really achieve or not? So always start with a baseline. So an example of that for Buckle Up for Life is if we're talking about if we want to increase misuse rates for families who've been through our program. If we do a pretest and find out that 3 out of 4 car seats are used incorrectly, then and we say we want to have a goal where only 1 out of 4 is used incorrectly. I mean, in theory, they'd all be used correctly, right? But if we want to set a short-term goal that only 1 in 4 is used incorrectly, then we would put that in our goal. We would say to decrease the misuse of car seats from 3 in 4 to 1 in 4. So we actually state in our goal what the baseline was, and we juxtapose that with what our goal is going to be, and that gives us a read for how close we are to success. Also in the measurable category, it's really important, I think, to talk about validity and reliability. And again, I'm not a statistician, and a statistician could talk about this better than I could, but at a high level, we want to talk about validity as questioning whether or not we're using the right tool to measure what we want to measure. And reliability is questioning whether the tool itself works or whether it gives us an accurate read each time. So is the way I'm using is the technique or the tool I'm using to measure my work, is it accurate, and is it giving me an appropriate read, and then is it working every single time so that we can count on it? So a better example here, I like examples. So if we're talking about validity, again, this is, am I using the right tool to measure the right thing? So if we want to talk about our health, and we want to measure weight, we want to measure our cholesterol, and we want to measure our waist circumference, there's certain tools you would use to measure each one of those things. So you wouldn't use a tape measure to measure weight, or you wouldn't use a blood stick biometric reading to measure weight. You would use a scale for that. Cholesterol, you'd get a blood read, finger stick, and waist circumference, you would use a tape measure or other device like that. So this is what we talk about with validity. So to think about Buckle Up for Life, if you want to measure actual misuse of, let's say adults, let's say if you want to measure the rate that adults don't buckle up, using a self-reported survey is probably not going to be as valid as a measure as if you stand in a parking lot and actually look and make notations and count the number of adults driving by that aren't buckled up. And we know that's not always realistic to do that, but that's an example of, although a survey isn't bad and self-reported data isn't bad, and we actually use self-reported data all the time, and there's definitely a time and a place for it, it's going to be less valid of a measure as something like doing an observation or looking at crash statistics or trauma registry where there's a report of, was the individual properly restrained or not, and it's a yes or a no based on actual fact. So all of this is on a spectrum, right? There's no wrong answer. It's just some measures are going to be more valid than others. So our goal is to get to a higher level of validity. With reliability, we're talking about, again, are we getting a consistent read each time? So if we look over time, in this example, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're using the same scale and the same 5-pound weight. Are we getting the same reading each time? So if Monday the scale says it's 4.8, Tuesday the scale says 5.1, and Wednesday 5.0, pounds, then that scale is not going to give us a reliable measure, because if we see movement in our number, if our measure from Monday through Wednesday goes from 4.8 pounds to 5.1 to 5, we don't know if it's because of something that we're doing that's changing the weight, or if it's just basically that the scale is broken. So we want to make sure our measures are really reliable. This is, for visual people, this is another way to look at it. So our goal is to get here to that bottom right-hand quadrant where our measures are reliable and valid. So what we're talking about here is all of the points being concentrated in the same area. That's going to tell us that our measure is reliable because we get the same result each time. But then the points being close to the bullseye is going to be our measure of validity, because it tells us that we're actually hitting the target that we want to hit. So I hope that makes sense. The top left-hand quadrant is where we don't want to go if we can help it, because we have low validity and low reliability. You can see in that scenario, we haven't hit the bullseye one time. We're totally missing the bullseye, and the shots are all across the target. So they're not concentrated in the same spot, and we're missing the bullseye. So that's our least favorable scenario. If we look in the bottom left-hand quadrant, we're still missing the bullseye, but at least we know our tools work because we're hitting about the same spot each time. So we're hitting the nail on the head every time. The nail's just in the wrong spot. The top right-hand quadrant, again, is kind of all over the place, so it's not very reliable, but we know that there's some validity there because we did hit the bullseye at least once. And then again, that bottom right-hand corner, that's going to be our green quadrant, is really where over time we want to end up with our measures. So this is just skimming the surface of validity and reliability, but it is really important to kind of talk about. So the next few slides we'll breeze through pretty quickly, but the A in SMART is attainable and actionable. And really what's important to consider here is, what do I have control of and what can I do? So if you are sitting in your program and you're saying, it would really be great as a component of Buckle Up for Life to change the law and have, you know, a much stricter, you know, law for seatbelt use or for car seat use, that is amazing. And I would say you're right, and that is where we should get. And that's one way to, you know, legislation is one way to influence behavior change. But unless you're a legislator or, you know, in a position of elected, you know, being an official or something like that in your local community or at a state level, that's not something that probably over the course of a 12-month grant you can directly control. It doesn't mean don't help out with advocacy efforts and supporting causes and that sort of thing, but as far as setting a goal, it wouldn't be very realistic to say, you know, by June 30th, I'm going to change the laws in my community. That's not really something you directly have control over the short term. So that's what we mean by attainable. And then actionable is, what can I do? So what is in my locus of control? So you know what, I can't change the law, but I can go form a great partnership with the local preschool or the church, because I know that those are centers of influence in the community, and we can get grassroots buy-in by forming partnerships there. So that's what we're talking about with the A. When we move to the R of SMART goals, we're talking about relevant and realistic. So does this even matter? You know, sometimes we get caught up in, we get kind of so far into the forest and we're just looking at trees that we forget to step back and look at the forests and say, are we even still on the right track? You know, is the thing that I'm working on, does this even matter for the sake of helping kids be safer in vehicles? And then, is there light at the end of the tunnel? You know, if the goal isn't realistic, it would be a better use of your time to focus on goals that are realistic. We love stretch goals, and we think, you know, there's all those quotes, you know, if you shoot for the stars, or you shoot for the moon and you miss, at least you land in the stars, you know, all of those kind of inspirational things. And that's great, and we love stretch goals. We love big, lofty goals. But at the same time, realizing that for a one-year grant, there's a lot of work that could be done in a one-year time period that's more realistic than some of the far-reaching kind of big, lofty goals. So we want people to meet their goals, so that's why we encourage to think about what's realistic and what's not. You know, can you get in 100 churches in a year? Maybe not, but you could probably get in 10 churches in a year. So we can kind of help, as you write your goals, we can help coach in that area a little bit. The last letter in SMART, the T, this is for time-bound, and it's really important to put bookends in your timeline. So although the work may continue forever, you know, just because the grant year ends doesn't mean that either your relationship with Buckle Up for Life is necessarily over, and it certainly doesn't mean that all kids everywhere are safer. But for the sake of so we're not saying put bookends on your work, because we always want to encourage kids to be safe and healthy and families to be safe and healthy. But as far as the goals, we want the goals to be time-bound. So an easy way to do that is always have the end of the grant year be kind of your deadline. So when we write goals here at Cincinnati Children's, we always say, I want to do this by this much, in this way, by this date. And whatever date that is usually the last day of our fiscal year. So we have all year to work on it, and at the end we want to you know, be able to assess whether or not we were successful. Putting bookends on your timeline also allows you to course correct along the way, because when you have a deadline that you're working to, it builds in some urgency to course correct as you go, rather than waiting until the end and then saying, we really wish we did that differently 8 months ago. So the goal here is, as you go, make the minor adjustments and tweaks to help steer us back onto track. And then at the end, though, it is still important to assess and evaluate, because next year you might want to do something different, or next year you might want to take the parts that worked really, really well and duplicate those or replicate those parts, and also share them with your colleagues at other sites across the country. So if you're doing something that's working really, really well, we want to share that so somebody else can skip that testing period and go ahead and just adopt what we know already works. So a few examples here. And again, a kind of disclaimer for anybody in our new sites, our new one-year sites who came to Orlando, this is all, a lot of this presentation is what you've already seen, so I apologize for that. But a lot of times we write goals or talk about goals, and the new year's coming up, and we think about resolutions and that sort of thing. And we have goals like, I want to lose weight, or I want to be healthier. Well, that's not a bad goal, but the way that it's been stated isn't really very smart, because what does healthier mean? Right? Does that mean you weigh less, or does that mean that you have more muscle mass, or does that mean that your cholesterol is in a better situation, or does it mean that your glucose level is better, right? So, and even weight loss, what does that mean? You know, there's a point too where you lose too much weight, and then it's not healthy anymore. So if we want to take a goal about weight loss or being healthier and make it smart, a better way to phrase it would be so that's specific because we're talking about who, right? Who, what, when, where, all of that. So I'm going to reduce my weight from this amount, so say 160 pounds, to this amount, 150 pounds, by 12/31/16. So we have our baseline there, the 160. We have our goal, which is the 150. It's time-bound because we have a bookend. We say at 12/31, that's when we're going to stop and look and see how we did to finally wrap up the goal. And it's specific because we're talking about weight. We're talking about pounds, not kilograms, not, you know, other tons, and we're talking about it's a reduction, so what direction are we moving it? So it's a much more smart, S-M-A-R-T way to word the goal. Another example here, not so smart, say exercise more or be more active. So some examples here could be, I will work out at least 30 minutes a day, at least, let me back up because I didn't put a baseline there. So let's say I will increase my exercise from 0 minutes a week to 30 minutes 3 times a day per week by January 1, 2017. So we're saying, what are you doing now? What do you want to do as your goal? When are you going to do it? And who's going to do it? And where and why and how and all that good stuff. So to be more specific, we could say by running, right? I will run on the treadmill 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, starting whatever week, and that's an increase from 0 miles a day that I'm currently running. So then we have all the components in there. Drinking more water, I kind of used this example already. If you're already drinking 7 glasses of water a day, then 8 glasses isn't really that much of a stretch. But if you currently are drinking 0 water, 0 ounces of water a day, and you want to drink 8 ounces or 12 or 16 or whatever the current recommendation is, that's important. So make sure you, again, I want to increase my water intake from X number of glasses or ounces per day or per week or per hour to X number of glasses or ounces, per day, week, unit, hour, whatever. Kind of keep it consistent by whatever days. So a few tips as we go through, just to really kind of wrap up, because I know I've been talking a lot and talking kind of fast, but to end out, just to summarize, we have make sure you get your baseline first, because that's really going to be your starting point to have perspective for what your goal should be. And it's okay if your baseline is 0. If you are implementing a new program and it's the first time you've done it, let's say you've never worked with a church before and you want to start reaching out to the faith-based community in your neighborhood, it could be churches, synagogues, mosques, whatever that looks like, it's fine for the baseline to be 0. You can make a goal that says to increase our community commitment through partnerships in the faith-based community from 0 partnerships to 3 partnerships, by the end of the year. And then offline have a definition of what is the operational definition of a partnership. So is it just enough that you called the faith leader and they said, yeah, we think this is a great program? Or do you say, well, we'll count it as a partnership once they've let us in 3 times a year to conduct a class, or once they let us put a flyer in their bulletin, at least 6 times a year. I mean, again, you can decide at your site what this looks like, but be really specific in kind of determining what those definitions are. I think another really great tip is to measure one thing per goal. A lot of times we have goals that are multifaceted, and that's really hard to track. So if I have a goal that is to lose more weight and exercise more and drink more water, it's hard to say if you're on track or not, because that's really 3 goals in one. So you might be really knocking it out of the park with 2 of the 3 goals, but if you're not drinking the water, then that's going to keep you back. So I would say it's better to have one thing to measure per goal, but have more goals if you want to do that. So if you want to have a goal about adults buckling up and a goal about, knowledge of teens or behaviors or attitudes of teens, and then you want to have a goal about, proper use of kids in car seats, make that be 3 separate goals, but be really specific in each one and only measure one thing per goal. It's gonna definitely help you in the long run. Make sure, again, we talked about validity and reliability. It's really important to make sure that those things are key. So, if you are, again, I think this comes into play a lot of times with surveys and things like that. Make sure that you're asking the right questions. Make sure you're asking questions in the right way. If you, for example, are working, in a population in a part of the country where it's not common for people to have internet access in their home, then I would say, an online survey, like a SurveyMonkey type of platform, may not be the most valid or reliable measure, because you're, as opposed to in the class giving them a paper survey, because you may not be reaching those people. So that tool that you're using may not be the best tool to measure the knowledge or kind of sentiments of that population if they don't have access to the tool. So that's an example of make sure that the the measure is valid and reliable. Another example is one of the challenges we run into with car side observations is if a car is coming by in the parking lot and you're trying to look in the window to see if kids are buckled up or not, if those windows are tinted, you can't really tell sometimes. You can't see in the car. Additionally, sometimes it makes people uncomfortable to do that. Looking into strangers' cars, or who are these people looking into my car, right? It gets awkward, and there's some kind of social weirdness that happens. Also, if you're working with a population that, let's say you're working at a church and you're working with a population that largely walks the church, but they still have a need for child passenger safety tools and education for, other areas that they drive to in their life, but you're doing the measurement at the church, but nobody's coming to church in a vehicle, they're all walking there, I would say a car side observation in the church parking lot isn't really going to be helpful. It's not going to be a valid measure for measuring whether those families are buckling up in their car if they're not even showing up in a car. So some of these examples sound silly, but they're all things that have actually happened in our programs. So just kind of keep that in mind. Am I measuring the thing that matters, and is the way in which I'm measuring it reliable and giving me an accurate read each time? And then keep it really, really simple. I know because we just talked about this for an hour, it's maybe making it seem like it's not so simple, but the idea is really simple. It's, we know what our mission is, we know what our vision is, so our challenge collectively is to plan operationally to say, what are some goals, a handful of goals we can set and plan to help us get closer to fulfilling our mission and our vision. And we want to clearly define what it is we want to do. We want to understand where we're starting. That's our baseline. And we want to have a realistic goal. Stretch goals are great, but let's think realistically, where could we land, and when do we want to do it by, and go from there. And if you're not meeting the mark along the way, that's totally okay, and that's why we course correct as we go. So many times I think in so many other programs, people set goals, and then they get to the end of the year and they go, well, we didn't make it, so we'll just set a new goal for next year. And that doesn't inspire learning, and it doesn't inspire any breakthrough of understanding or knowledge, which is what this program is all about. So we want to learn along the way. We like to say it's okay to fail as long as you learn something, and as long as you learn something, you actually haven't failed. So if we miss the mark on some of these outcomes goals, we wanted to increase knowledge by 70%. We only increased it by 54%. That's fine as long as we learned something, and we know now that, well, next year we need to do this a little bit differently, or that wasn't the best approach for this, but these three components worked really great. So the goal is really about continuous learning, continuous improvement. That's the Kaizen thinking that Toyota loves to talk about, and that we've really adopted here at Cincinnati Children's. So keep it really simple, measure one thing, understand your baselines, because that's where you're starting from, and reliability and validity. So that's kind of scraping the surface of what we wanted to cover today. I know I've been talking a ton, so I'm going to turn it over and see if there's any questions from the groups, or maybe somebody out there in webinar land has an example of something that you're doing really well at your site, or a challenge that you ran into with setting a goal, and maybe a way that you overcame that. I don't know if anybody has anything out there to share. And if so, make sure you unmute your line so we can hear you. And if nobody has anything to share, that's okay too. But we want to throw that out there. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any feedback, so we're finishing about 10 minutes early. So we will be sure to send out these slides just so you have them, and feel free to share with your colleagues or people that work on your programs. If we can help you any time setting goals or crafting goals or deciding what measures would work best, or not only what the measure should be, but how do we actually measure it? How do we go about measuring things? We're happy to help out. We can help you one-on-one offline. Feel free to bring that up in your monthly status calls, and we can come back to it. Today was more of a kind of survey overview of all of the general principles, and as you take this back to apply in your own sites, just know that we're happy to help you kind of set some goals and think about what would work in your specific community. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time you've committed to this, and we continue to appreciate everything that you do every day for your kids and families.